So welcome to Green Drinks. My name is Ginevra. I'm the program director at Sustainable Woodstock. We were founded in 2009, and we're a nonprofit community and environmental action and education organization. We build on Woodstock's legacy as the birthplace of the modern conservation movement. Our vision promotes vibrant, inclusive, thriving communities where we live sustainably now and into the future. So you've come to one of our monthly Green Drinks events. These are social events to connect people who have similar environmental interests. We invite local nonprofits, businesses, individuals to make short presentations highlighting green initiatives and programs that are happening in our area and the state. I'm going to take a minute to plug the next Green Drinks, which is coming up soon. We're doing it in early August, August 4th to be specific, and it will be on electric lawn care. So Stephen Wisbaum, the founder of the Mo Electric campaign, has been encouraging the transition to residential and commercial e-lawn equipment in Vermont since 2016. He's going to join us for Green Drinks, and in his presentation, he's going to discuss the environmental and economic benefits of e-lawn care equipment, as well as opportunities and challenges that still exist for adoption of this really great, rapidly emerging and evolving technology. So that's really exciting. That's August 4th, also a Thursday, and it's going to be a virtual event as well. I will send out the information in my follow-up email. But I'll go ahead and introduce Geoff. I'm going to read your bio, Geoff. Today we're hearing from Geoff Martin. Geoff is our Intermunicipal Regional Energy Coordinator. For short, we all say IREC, I-R-E-C, our IREC coordinator. He works with Barnard, Bradford, Norwich, Sharon, Stratford, Thetford, and Woodstock to lessen overall energy use, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and move to renewable generation of electricity within participating towns. Geoff's work focuses on energy efficiency, conservation, and renewable production by the participating towns in their operations. Geoff holds a master's in environmental sciences from Emory University and a bachelor's in developmental studies from Brown. He worked as a BPI certified energy auditor before serving as the Town of Hartford's energy coordinator, which was his position before he came to us. So I think I'm going to stop talking then, Geoff, and hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Ginevra. Thank you all for being here tonight, for your interest in the Climate Action Plan. I'm just going to share my screen. And assuming you all can see my first slide here, give me 1 second, please. All right, so yeah, as Ginevra mentioned, I'm Geoff Martin. I'm the Intermunicipal Regional Energy Coordinator, or IREC for short, at the Two Rivers Ottauquechee Regional Commission. And so tonight, obviously going to be covering the Climate Action Plan, but also just wanted to spend a bit of time going over my role as the IREC and some of the work that we've done over the last couple of years, just to give a little bit of background and context, and then spend the bulk of the time talking about the Climate Action Plan. So the IREC program, it's a collaboration among 7 towns in the Two Rivers region. Ginevra mentioned those towns, but here's a little map to help visualize it. So Bradford, Thetford, Stratford, Norwich, Sharon, Barnard, and Woodstock are all participating in this group. And all these towns were interested in having staff support for implementing their energy plans and trying to meet their climate and energy goals. And so Two Rivers kind of stepped in as the Regional Planning Commission for all these towns and offered to host this position. And then the towns ultimately contracted with Two Rivers through a shared services model. So again, I'm an employee of Two Rivers working with these towns, partially funded by the towns and also partially funded by Two Rivers. And there's a steering committee, IREC steering committee that guides the work plan. So there's a representative from each of the 7 towns that's appointed by their select boards. In Woodstock, that representative is Ginevra. And so that group, we meet once a month as a full group, and then more often than that individually, and they help decide what to focus on in their towns. So again, the goal of the program is to implement the regional energy plan as well as the town's energy plans, reduce energy consumption, lower greenhouse gas emissions, use more renewable energy. In Woodstock, the town passed a climate emergency declaration in 2020, and with that set a goal to be net zero emissions by 2030. So that is definitely a focus in Woodstock, and some of the other towns in the group have similar goals in addition to the state's goals. And so a lot of the focus has been on municipal infrastructure and operations, but we are beginning to transition to community level efforts, and certainly the Climate Action Plan is a big step in that direction. And the work to date includes data gathering and assessment, so collecting town energy data like electricity consumption, heating fuel use, and vehicle fuel use, putting that all into one database. I've done greenhouse gas emission inventories for most of the towns. So basically establishing a baseline and tracking progress from there. Some projects, and I've got a slide with some examples of those like physical projects in municipal buildings. A little bit of work on policies. So for example, green procurement policy, which essentially puts in place procedures for the town to consider, every time that they're looking at an energy related purchase, make sure that they're considering the most efficient, cleanest options available. So Stratford, Bradford, and Thetford have each passed that green procurement policy. And we've done a little bit of work with zoning bylaws, but that might be a bigger focus in the future. That's something that's in the Climate Action Plan as an option for towns to consider, energy-related zoning bylaws. And then just a few demonstrations as well, and I've got a quick slide on that. So here's some examples of the projects that we've worked on. So this first picture here is of the Barnard Town Hall, where we weatherized that building. So air sealed and added insulation to the town hall. And by doing that, we're able to reduce the air leakage by 1/3. And we're estimated to save about 500 gallons of fuel oil every year. And now we're working with the Barnard Energy Committee to evaluate the options for getting that building off of fuel oil and finding a new heat source. And then some ongoing projects in Woodstock. We developed work scopes for 5 of Woodstock's municipal buildings. Again, the focus being mostly on getting those buildings off of propane, putting in heat pumps, also weatherization and LED lighting. And if you're in Woodstock, you may have seen the special article at the last town meeting seeking approval to finance those projects. That article was successful. So now in the process of doing the final designs for those projects and hope to begin implementing those projects in the fall or winter of this year. Also added some solar to cover some electricity costs in Woodstock. In Sharon, at the library, actually tomorrow, they're going to be ripping out the oil furnace there and the oil tank. So that building will no longer have oil in it, and they're going to be putting in a heat pump system. So it'll be totally heated with that heat pump. And we're looking to do the same thing in Thetford too at their town hall. As I mentioned, the demonstrations, there's a couple pictures. These are really just like fun things that hopefully will have an impact down the road. So I think particularly for vehicle fleets, the technology is newer, maybe less familiar for people. So I think it's helpful for staff to actually see things, get to try them out, so that hopefully when something comes up for replacement, people are more comfortable making that transition. So the picture on the left there is of an electric mower demo that we did at the Woodstock Town Green. And then on the right, the Richmond Police Department has a Tesla as one of their police vehicles. And so the police chief brought that down to Thetford, and the Woodstock, Thetford, and Bradford police departments came out and got to check out that vehicle. So hopefully this leads to some change in the next couple of years. Also in Woodstock, we don't have a picture of it, but the Public Works Department tried out an electric street sweeper, which was pretty cool. And so, as I mentioned, we're beginning to move from municipal level to the community level, where, of course, the bulk of our emissions come from. So one example of that is with the Stratford Community Solar Array. So we have 21 households that have signed up to participate in this array in Stratford. Most of them are Stratford residents, but there's also some Woodstock, Sharon, and Norwich residents that are participating in that array. And in Thetford, the school has there's an existing array at the school, elementary school, and we've applied for a permit to expand that array, make it about 3 times its current size. And if that would end up benefiting the school, the town, and then also the community, we target income qualified Thetford residents to benefit from that array. And then, of course, the climate action plan, and that's, again, sort of our major step towards working at the community level, and what we're going to focus on for the rest of the evening. So a little background on the climate action plan, how it came to be. So I think it's fair to say that it was really driven by 2 of the IREC towns, let's say Woodstock and Thetford. In Woodstock, Sustainable Woodstock asked the select board for permission to work on a climate action plan to help the town meet its net zero by 2030 goal. And then in Thetford, a member of the select board and some of the energy committee members were very interested in developing a climate action plan. So those individual town climate action plans will probably still go forward, but as a result of those discussions in Woodstock and Thetford, the IREC steering committee decided that it would make sense to put together a plan at the regional level. And so ultimately 6 out of the 7 IREC towns chose to participate. So Barnard is, for right now at least, not participating in this, simply because we've got some projects going on there that we don't want to distract from, and really keep the attention on those projects. But the steering committee agreed that the plan should really be short and actionable, not a lot of text, just kind of to the point. So if you've seen the plan ahead of time this evening, you probably noticed that. And in addition, just wanted to mention that the plan hasn't been adopted by any town yet. It hasn't gone to any select boards for approval. At this point, at least, potentially that could happen in the future, but right now it's really just for use by the energy committees. So we put together the full IREC climate action plan, and it has 69 actions across 5 different sectors. That's on our website, the Two Rivers website, and Ginevra also sent a link to that ahead of time. So you can find it either in that email or on our website. Right now, it is just an Excel spreadsheet. So we're hoping to put that into a format that's more user-friendly and accessible, but that's the format it's in right now. To put this together, we drew from the Two Rivers Regional Energy Plan, as well as our municipal energy plans, and then some other climate action plans around the state. In particular, Hartford's climate action plan was a big source of inspiration for this plan. We also, of course, had lots of input from the steering committee as well as from the town energy committees. And I would say that plan maybe is a bit of a loose term. And the initial goal was to have a plan that really laid out year to year the actions that towns were going to take one year after the next. But as we got into it, we realized that that might not be the best approach, just because we don't know what's going to happen in 2 years from now in terms of funding or policies at the state and federal level. So instead, I think it's more like a sort of repository of ideas. It's like a bunch of ideas that would advance our collective climate goals. And then each year, the energy committees and the steering committee will decide which actions are most important and that they want to focus on for the coming year. We chose to focus then from that full climate action plan with the 69 actions, we chose to focus in on the actions that require, or at least would benefit substantially from working together at the regional level. The idea here that being that individual energy committees could work on other actions from that full climate action plan that don't benefit as much from collaboration. But one of the strengths of the IREC program is that we have these towns working together. So we wanted to take advantage of that as much as possible. So we narrowed that full list down to 19 actions. And this is the list, the 19 actions that Ginevra sent out in advance of this meeting. So we had a meeting back in May with the steering committee and members from each of the town's energy committees, where we discussed those actions. We actually, before the meeting, we ranked the 19 actions, those collaborative actions, the ones that made the most sense to work together on. Everyone had the opportunity to rank those 19 actions based on 4 criteria. So one was equity. How likely is the action to benefit individuals or communities that have historically been underserved by energy efficiency and clean energy programs? Feasibility, how likely is the action actually going to happen? Impact in terms of its impact on emissions, energy use, costs for residents or businesses, and then also enthusiasm. So how excited are people to work on the actions? So we did that in advance of this meeting, and we're able to narrow that list of 19 down to 10. And those 10 actions are the ones that we discussed at this meeting in May with the help of a facilitator, did some exercises, and ultimately settled on 2 actions that our energy committees are going to work together on in the coming year. So those 2 actions were climate action guidelines and pledge, and increasing compliance with the residential building energy standards, or RBs. So obviously I'm going to go into some detail about what those are, but first I just wanted to mention that what we're going to do next is we're going to create working groups for each of the actions, and those working groups will be made up of an energy committee from each of the 6 towns, and those working groups will be responsible for developing the plans and implementing the actions over the coming year. So the first action, climate action guidelines and pledge. The idea here is to create guidelines for residents as well as businesses, and those would be separate guidelines for each, to lower their emissions. Potentially could include a pledge as well. So we don't know exactly what that pledge would look like, but maybe committing to reducing your emissions by a certain percentage by 2030, something like that. That pledge might be more effective for businesses. So if we had a regional pledge for businesses to sign on to, that might, maybe they could get some publicity from signing on to that, and we could also be easier to hold them accountable. Same idea, might be effective at the residential level, but we'll have to see as the work group starts to dig into this action. And then the guidelines themselves, I think, would draw from examples around the region. So in Norwich, the Energy Committee has created what you see here, this home action pledge. Basically, asking people to go through their homes and look at every system in their home, see what the age of the system is, what fuel it uses, what's the plan to replace it, what are you going to replace it with. We might also draw from the green procurement policy that I mentioned earlier, that has some guidelines around technologies and fuel types that are acceptable or not acceptable from a climate perspective. But we also want the guidelines to go beyond just technologies to also include practices. So the image on the right there is of Sustainable Woodstock's forest carbon management poster. So that would be an example of a land management practice that might be included in the guidelines. So if you're a landowner, how do you manage your forested land for sequestering and storing carbon? We also might include guidelines for conserving energy, taking less trips, guidelines on climate-friendly diets, and then even, one idea was even making sure that you're at least looking at the climate platforms of the representatives that you vote for. So not being partisan, but just recognizing that what happens at the state and the federal level is so important, and we can't expect individual actions alone to solve the climate crisis. Finally, with the climate action guidelines action, we also want to include showcases. So basically organizing events where people that have adopted clean technologies like heat pumps or EVs, or practices like land management, can educate other members of the community about these topics. And this picture here is of a EV Expo in White River Junction a few years ago, where people that owned EVs came, brought them, and people got to look in them, and I think even drive some around. And this was actually a collaboration among several energy committees in the area. So we want to do a lot more events like this. So moving on to the residential building energy standards, or RBs for short. So RBs is the state's energy code, and it's required for new construction and for most additions and alterations. Problem is from 2015 to 2016, which unfortunately that's the most recent study period that we have. Within that period, only 2/3 of residential new construction complied with the RBs. So pretty poor compliance rate. That compliance has probably only gone down just because the RBs has become more complex in more recent years. And I think the main reason for that lack of compliance is because it's relying on self-certification. So builders self-certify that their projects have met the energy code. But there are really no checks in place to verify that they've actually done so. So basically, builders are filling out a certificate saying that they've met energy code, and they're supposed to turn that into their towns. But a lot of times towns don't even realize that they're supposed to be getting these RB certificates. And even if they are getting them, they're probably not checking to make sure that they're filled out correctly. And even if they are filled out correctly, builders can just put information down there. No one's actually going to the homes, inspecting the homes, and making sure that they've met code. So that's a pretty big issue if we want to meet our climate targets. We don't want homes being built today and next year that aren't meeting code, and we have to go back and retrofit them in the future. So some of the ways that the work group will be thinking about how to address this is through encouraging compliance through existing channels. So for example, ensuring that permit applicants receive a copy of the RB's handbook. That's a book that describes the energy code. And so the idea here is that if you're going in for a permit for a new home, you get this RB's handbook, at least you're aware that there is an energy code, and you can talk with your builder about that energy code and make sure that they have a plan to meet that. And then also promoting Efficiency Vermont's new construction program, which is a great program that Efficiency Vermont will work with a builder to not only meet code, but actually go beyond code. And there's an incentive to participate in that program. But I think the most important part of this action will be advocating at the state level for increasing compliance, because ultimately this is a state energy code, and it shouldn't be on the towns to enforce it and make sure that people are complying. So that will be the main focus of this action. And then finally, the working group, the RB's working group, will also consider expanding this action. So recognizing that RB's compliance is a narrow focus, focused on new construction. There's not a ton of new construction in our area. Again, it's important that the new construction that exists is done right the first time. But because there's not a ton of new construction in our area, we might want to expand that action to be something more like a building efficiency action. And that could include improving the efficiency of rental housing. Renters are often living in homes that are inefficient and tend to have very little control over their energy costs. They can turn the heat down and not turn on the lights, but can't make improvements to the home that would lower energy costs. And then also potentially looking at adopting zoning changes or ordinances at the town level to encourage efficiency and fuel switching. So thank you for listening to my presentation. We're definitely interested in your feedback, your input on the two actions that we'll be working on over the coming year, but also on the plan as a whole. So if you've had a chance to take a look at that, would welcome your feedback on that and any questions on the presentation as well. Ginevra, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Geoff. Sorry, I'm looking at this. So I put in the chat that you're welcome to write questions there to ask Geoff that myself and our director, Michael, can then pose, as I see someone just did. You're also welcome, if you want me to unmute you to ask a question in person, you can use the raise hand function. So at the bottom, there's a little smiley face. It says reactions. If you click that, you can raise your hand virtually. Don't actually raise your hand on the screen because I won't notice. Or otherwise, yeah, you can just type the questions. So why don't we get started here? Karen wrote something in the chat. Is there anything being done to promote residential heat pumps? Still a lot of misinformation about use in cold climates.
Yeah, that would fall under the climate action guidelines action. So part of the guidelines will certainly be looking at heat pumps, but also I mentioned the showcases that we want to put on. And so one of those showcases could be showing people how effective a heat pump is, maybe inviting people to a home that have heat pumps. So that I think for the coming year, that will be the way that we promote residential heat pumps through that action.
Yeah, and I know the Cornish, and I think it was Cornish and Plainfield Energy committees recently participated in a heat pump showcase. So I would love to do something like that sometime soon. If any towns on here want to partner, I'm ready. Jennifer Grant asks, what was the fourth criteria for ranking the 19 focal actions? Equity, feasibility, enthusiasm?
Impact. And by impact, we meant impact on greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, and energy costs for residents and businesses.
Thank you. What are the, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
There you are, Michael. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, so I was just wondering, Geoff, what are the most important things that we can do, each individual, to help with the climate action plan, would you say?
So I think one thing would be to join your energy committee. I mean, so that really these are going to be energy committee led actions. So if you want to be deeply involved in the process, that would be the best step, would be to join your energy committee if you haven't done so already, because we're going to be relying on energy committees to really carry this work forward. In addition, look out for the guidelines when they come out, and for the demonstrations that we do, and participate in those. And there'll probably be opportunities for volunteering at a demonstration like that. And certainly you're always welcome to contact me, or I imagine you, Michael, or Ginevra, to provide input and feedback at any time.
Yeah, that's definitely the best answer, is start off with your energy committee. Henry had his hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute. That should let you unmute, I think, Henry. Yep.
That worked. Yeah, so is there a model to actually get people from other communities, maybe other states, other countries? Is there a model to actually reduce energy consumption? I realize you've got, you know, the electric utility with, or not utility, but the Negawatt from Efficiency Vermont. But I'm just wondering about, I think with heat pumps and electric cars, and with a lot of these transitions, in some cases, we're just consuming more because we can. So any thoughts about how to skin that one?
I'll do my best. Well, I mentioned briefly that part of the guidelines that we will be developing, have not developed yet, will include conservation. So it's not just going to be focused on, you know, switching the technologies that you're using, but also how you live, right? And thinking about just the energy that you're using, whether that's dirty fossil energy or clean energy, we need to use less of it. So maybe part of the answer is to stay tuned for those guidelines. But another thing that towns do have control over are their zoning bylaws and regulations. And there are things that towns can do to encourage denser development, for example, so that people have more opportunity to walk and bike places and not take their cars everywhere. So there are definitely some things that towns have control over that can help lower energy consumption. I hope that at least somewhat answers your question, but I don't have the answer to that.
So Andy also had.
Sorry, you said something else, Henry, but you were muted. Did you have something you wanted to follow up on?
I was just going to say a good first start.
Thanks.
Andy also had his hand up, so I'm just going to ask Andy to unmute and see if we can get Andy on board here.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, Andy.
Geoff, what you just wound up saying just now led into the question that I have. So I live in Heartland. We have no zoning code at all. We have no zoning. Of the 5 towns or 6 towns, is it now, or 7?
So there's 7 towns in the IREC program and 6 that are directly participating in the climate action plan.
Okay, for the RBES arm of your project, how many of those towns have A, zoning codes, and B, building inspectors?
So I think all but Sharon have zoning in their towns. No one has building inspectors. I think the only town in the state or municipality in the state that has building inspectors would be Burlington, but I'm not positive about that, but I have never heard of any town other than Burlington. So yeah, we're gonna need to find a way to enforce the RBs without zoning potentially, and certainly without building inspectors or energy code inspectors. We have an idea for how to do that. I don't know how much detail I should go into now. It might take a while, but we do have a way, potentially a way of doing that would not burden the town and would not require zoning. So it basically would rely on a third-party energy rater to do the inspections. So if towns could require that, or if the state could require that, which would be even better, that would not, increase any burden, increase the burden on towns, but would probably lead to better compliance. So that's kind of the path that we think is most promising, and would work in towns that don't have zoning.
Thanks.
I'm going to lower Andy's hand. I want to call out in the chat, Linda, who's with Norwich Energy Committee, just made a note that you can volunteer with your town energy committee without officially being appointed as a member. That is true, whatever town you're in. You can even volunteer in other towns' energy committees, which would be interesting, probably. And then I'm just going to also ask Karen's question, because she posed it a little while ago. Are there incentive programs for replacing gas cooking with induction? I'm not aware of any. Are you, Geoff?
I'm not. That's a great question. There should be, but I don't think there are. Could be wrong about that, but Efficiency Vermont, if the incentive would either come from Efficiency Vermont or Green Mountain Power. So those would be the 2 organizations to check with.
And I'm going to ask Sarah Bruce to unmute. How about, because she has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. In response to a question a few minutes ago, I would say a major action that would potentially reduce consumption is weatherization. And In my opinion, this is actually very difficult. It's a bit of a bugaboo. But Heartland Energy Committee is going to give it a go. And we are working on a Weatherize Heartland campaign that is planned to start by mid-September. And that timing is to coincide with a tremendous amount of money, particularly state ARPA money, coming not just for low-income households, but also moderate income households. And we're not limiting to low and moderate. We're really focusing on everybody. But when you look at the goals for the various metrics of reaching the 2025 goals as defined in the CEP, and then as defined by Two Rivers for this town, that town, and that town, Heartland has a huge way to go on weatherization. We are way off. Now, I think the data are one, outdated, and two, incomplete, but I still think we're way off. So this is why I'm pushing to try and get this started. We're working somewhat in developing it with Windsor, and they may run a parallel program. And as soon as I have it a little more put together, I'll let other energy committees know. They may or may not want to sort of piggyback or follow suit. And I would say one thing in particular is for anybody that doesn't know the group called Green Saving Smart. Does that ring a bell in anybody's? No faces are moving up and down or anything? Well, I would look it up. It's a state program. It's a group of the 5 community action agencies in the state. That would be in this area, at least for Heartland, Sevka, also Capstone, and the one up in the Northeast Kingdom, and 2 others, names I don't know. And they are specifically trying to serve low income, low to moderate income people as financial and energy coaches. And they are working on 2 public Zoom workshops, one on weatherization, and the other one that I know even less about, but it's also, I'm told it's also coming, one on transportation. So I would suggest people consider something to do with weatherization as a way to reduce consumption, and even reduce consumption without people necessarily thinking that's what they're doing, because the pitch is that you're going to use less, which means it's going to cost you less. And that is perhaps a stronger argument than just be a good person and don't waste energy. So I would think about weatherization. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Dee's question, floating an idea for participating IREC towns to pool private charitable funding to add to Efficiency Vermont incentives for heat pumps, EVs, et cetera.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's something that Sustainable Woodstock might be, and I wouldn't say private charitable funding, but working on a program just like that to add to existing incentives, and something that I think all of our towns should consider.
Yeah, excellent idea. And I would add to that that one of the key pieces of that is that the challenge is which for Sustainable Woodstock's role, we're working with many families now to basically fill in the gaps between what's available between Efficiency Vermont and SEPCA and other organizations and agencies. And one of the things that's really key to that is actually spending a lot of time working with the contacts and families who need help. And that's Geneva's been doing a huge amount of that, taking the leadership role on that for our program. So there are a lot of different pieces to it, but the funding is definitely obviously really key.
Yeah, it's a great point, Dee, because especially for moderate and lower income families like that, even with an incentive, it's not feasible. So we hadn't considered pooling funding with all the communities, but it's certainly something we could discuss, and could Sustainable Woodstock ask as a fiscal sponsor? We're being put on the spot, I think. Yeah, we'll have to discuss it with the other towns, see if they're interested. Tracy, I'm gonna ask you to unmute and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, there we go.
Hmm.
Thanks, Ginevra, and thanks for the presentation, Geoff. I'm not looking at the plan right now. I did my homework before the meeting, but so what I wouldn't say is I really thought it was so wonderful how, when it was asked earlier, what was your organizing criteria, that through each action area, you laid out the emissions. And so it helped us prioritize, where we put our energy by emissions. So I have just along that theme, I think the other thing it does really well, I should say, is set up programs like I'm, blessed to have here in Thetford, where there's a lot of education going on for people about EVs and efficiency and, window inserts and all those things that help us change our behaviors more easily because we can go to our neighbor's house and try things out. But I'm wondering about the next step in terms of the plan, because what I didn't see were metrics like how many people installed heat pumps, in X year, how many towns built out at least one or two pieces of charging infrastructure for EVs. And when I say vehicles, I'm also including bikes, and, those kinds of things. And I'm wondering if in the planning phase, you guys had thought about that and it was rejected as maybe too ambitious at this point. But I just find that metrics help. It helps us locate the sources of funds or tax credits, which I know has changed my own behavior in my adoption of first a solar tracker. And then when you give a moose a muffin and you make too many pieces of electricity, you go buy an EV at a tremendously reduced rate with tax credits. So I'm wondering about that piece of it, because I only read the plan. I didn't go to the Excel spreadsheet, but I'd love to see some metrics because I think that helps us all. You measure what's important and it guides your behavior. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. And so the Excel spreadsheet does have some metrics. It's far from perfect, but like your example of I think, well, I don't remember exactly what your examples were, but we definitely have number of electric vehicles registered in our towns, our 7 towns, heat pumps. I think there's weatherization jobs. I mean, some of the metrics that we do have data on, we included. The group originally we were considering trying to do a greenhouse gas emission inventory at the community level for all the towns. And the reality is just the data doesn't exist. I mean, it's even the state has a hard time doing it at the state level. So it's I don't want to say impossible, but not very helpful at the local community level. So we decided not to spend a bunch of time trying to do that, to track those metrics that we do have information on, like those EV registrations and heat pump installs. We get information from Efficiency Vermont every year. So that's one way that we can continue to track progress and then kind of use that information or that data as a proxy for reducing emissions. So that's kind of the strategy that we came up with. But if you have other ideas for metrics, certainly would love to hear them, because I don't think you mentioned number of EV charging stations. That's not something that I don't think was included. So that's another good one.
Thanks, Geoff. I'm just posting. Someone asked for the link to the plan. Right now, it is on Two Rivers, Ottauquechee, their website, and I just gave you the link to the page. If you scroll down and click IREC Climate Action Plan, you can download it. It's not perfect. It's an Excel document. So if someone on here is really handy with visualizations, with website development, and wants to volunteer some time, we are looking into making a more user-friendly version of the climate action plan, because it's hard to digest an Excel spreadsheet, I'd say. I will go ahead and, hi, Steve. I'll ask you to unmute and you can go ahead.
I have just two questions. One, an observation, one, a comment. How do we know what can convince people to make a difference? It can't be just money, but maybe some people have just given up saying, you know, you're thinking in 5 years, but we got droughts going on and we have all kinds of problems in this world. It's hopeless. That's number one. And number two, wouldn't it be nice if you entered Woodstock or any of the other cities, towns in the area who are doing their best, that we mention that this is a place that's trying to conserve energy and list the kinds of things with signs all over the place. And maybe on our roadways saying Vermont is a leader in, and the slower you drive, the more you'll protect the environment. Those are the kinds of things that I think would be inspirational. And I'm wondering if those are part of the advertising for sustainable energy and things of that sort.
That's another great point. I don't know if we have an action like that. I don't think we do. I'd have to go back and look through it in more detail, but I don't remember something like that. And it's a great idea. I mean, I know, like, for example, in Woodstock, the town passed the climate emergency declaration, but you don't see that anywhere. It's really hard to even find it. I don't even know if it's actually on the town's website. So I think you have a great point that all towns need to do a better job of promoting and advertising the fact that they're really working hard to address climate change.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. And thank you, Steve. I mean, it certainly probably would fall under one of our two priorities, which is like the education aspect of what we're doing. Sarah, did you have another question? I can't tell. I'm going to ask you to unmute. You do. Okay.
I'm trying to unmute. Okay. All right. I've probably already lost one point, but one point in response to the previous thing is that in addition to our weatherization ideas, I personally would like to, in the next year or two, manage to get at least one more 500 kilowatt community array. And I'd actually like it to be a rental. You rent the panels as opposed to buy them. And that really has to do with low and moderate income, the people that don't happen to have $15,000 handy to put down to start with, and they don't have enough income to have a tax burden that they can actually use a tax rebate for. So that's very problematic. But there are solar things, solar farms, community solar, where it's rental rather than purchase. And I'd love to see that. And I'd actually like to see it right at the I-91 Heartland exit with a sign about Heartland, what it's doing in terms of this. Heartland had, and my other point relates to the fact that Heartland had an article on their town meeting last year, and it was a vote, and it was by Australian ballot because we didn't have an in-person meeting. And that was actually very good, because the first time Heartland had a climate anything article was in 2020, and it didn't get voted on until 1:30 in the afternoon, and there were about 50 people left. But it passed unanimously with 50 people. But you know, those are the real diehards. So this past March, we had it on an Australian ballot, and there were 900 people voted, and it passed by 75%. And what did it say? It said, we resolve to meet the climate emergency plan's goals. But in response to perhaps Steve's question and just response, is that anywhere? Probably not, because I'm not going to speak to all other towns. I know this is true for Norwich because I've talked to Linda Gray about it, but it's true for Heartland also, is that these things are non-binding articles. It means they can be totally ignored. And I would say in some ways, I think there is some evidence that the 2021 that had a unanimous approval by only 50 people has been ignored. So the question is, how can we get non-binding votes and articles to be more obvious and less sort of potentially ignored? And I don't know whether it's signage or promotion. I mean, our energy committee tries to promote that one that passed, a couple months ago, but it's a challenge.
Yeah, to Geneva's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as Woodstock goes, so Sustainable Woodstock worked very closely with the town to create the enhanced energy plan for the town, and we followed through with a number of the different provisions of that, including the reduction of carbon emissions over time. We have a really active energy and dedicated energy action group. I don't think there's really any substitute for a core group of people in any given town that are deeply committed to meeting those goals. It's always possible to do more public education, and I'm listening to some of these comments, and they're great comments, and I'm seeing ways that we could be doing more of that for sure. But it takes a group of people who are like really focused on it and really dedicated, meeting every month, looking at what's going on with the select board, what's going on with the town, what's going on with developments that are private, what's going on with developments that have to do with public buildings. In Woodstock, a lot of it's renovation of the EMS building, the new high school and junior high school that are being developed. We're working with the group there to get that towards net zero. Those kinds of things that you really just have to do a deep dive into what's happening and just really keep your antennae up about everything. And I don't think there's any substitute for that. Really, that would be the best answer I could have to that. I know, Geoff. Never.
I was just going to say that just following up on Geneva's point that this should be included in that green guidelines action. So I'm thinking about how to really promote and hold select boards to the promises that they've made or that voters have acted on.
Yeah, another piece that comes to mind too is just really good partnerships. We work a lot with individuals who are really committed. I know Ann McSude is on tonight. She was one of the people who really advocated for the climate emergency resolution, as well as the interregional energy coordinator position. Change the World Kids, a lot of the high school students. I know Andy McLaughlin's on tonight. He was really active in that. And Barbara Barry's been involved for years with our energy group. So, other partnerships with individuals, but also organizations in town, trying to think of other folks who've been involved, but partnerships are really key.
Yeah, and even though it feels like the world is burning, because it sort of is, we have made some really, the fact that Geoff is on tonight and that Geoff's position exists was a direct result of, individual action and advocacy on the part of the energy group. So it's that part that is exciting, those aspects of things. I'm going to go ahead and ask Gina's question because we only have 4 minutes left. If you had to pick one thing that a family should do to have an impact on global warming, what would it be?
Wow. Maybe I'm gonna take the easy way out and say that I keep calling it green guidelines. We changed it from green guidelines to climate action guidelines. So that's the actual title of that action. That might be something, or will be something, definitely will be something that we'll dig into with that working group. So again, stay tuned. I don't want to say something and then think 10 minutes later I should have said something else.
In law school, the answer to every question starts with "it depends." You can answer it that way.
Geoff, I was just thinking, if we have a few minutes, would you be willing to just very briefly tell people what happened with EEI and how we got that going in town? I mean, that's reducing by 12% the carbon emissions of the whole town of Woodstock.
Yeah, sure. That was the projects in Woodstock that I was referring to in one of my slides. So actually, originally, I think four of the IREC towns went in together to competitively solicit a company that does this type of energy work for municipalities and schools. So that was kind of a cool partnership. We all went in together looking for a company, ended up picking EEI. They're out of Manchester, New Hampshire, and they toured all the municipal buildings and working with Sustainable Woodstock and town staff. We came up with a work plan for those buildings and met with the select board many times to kind of refine that work scope. Ultimately, it wasn't voted on by the select board, but went to a special article at town meeting, and Sustainable Woodstock did an excellent job getting the word out about it and explain to people what it was all about. And ultimately it passed at town meeting this past March. So again, the main focus will be on getting those 5 buildings of propane using heat pumps so we can use cleaner electricity to heat those buildings. We'll also be doing weatherization and some lighting work as well.
I just wanted to also call out or acknowledge that it's really great that Sustainable Lebanon is represented at the meeting tonight. Jennifer Grant has zoomed in. So hi, Jennifer, and it's really great to have you here.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for these questions and for your thoughts. I've seen some comments in the chat about how we live in Vermont has an impact on our carbon footprint in terms of where our electricity is from. And Steve made a comment about giving hope that we can make a difference in our advertising. So yeah, you've all shared some really good stuff that you're doing in your own communities and thoughts on what we should be working on. So I guess I would just encourage people to get involved in their energy committee if you are interested in this plan and you kind of want to see, if you want to be part of these actions in the coming couple of years.